Guys, I'm just going to wait for our bank of lights to go live on this broadcast series with AHDB, with the fantastic Kay Lane, and also with the fantastic Bonnie Huval. But we'll do the proper intro. Just got to wait for all of the social media to go live. So, guys, I wanted to ask you. I've just been to a potato conference for the last 2 days in Cambridge, and it was fascinating. I learned so much. But I was explaining to some of my friends who are non-industry as to what a potato conference was, and they said, "Well, what's the point of having a potato conference?" So it's a huge food source in the UK, if not the world, and everyone's got to find out innovation and new varieties. Bonnie, with your backgrounds with the likes of engineering, with space people, what's the weirdest conference that you've ever attended that you think is normal, that we would think is like crazy?
Space people, we didn't go to conferences much. We worked.
Wow.
But what is the weirdest conference I've ever been to? That's a hard one to answer. I used to go pretty regularly to the Independent Computer Consultants Association conferences, and we could be pretty weird.
Well, that sounds exciting, Kay, doesn't it? That sounds independent computer. Okay, and why would he be pretty weird?
Well, for example, we hired a professional stand-up comedian for the attendant entertainment one night, and he couldn't outdo the one-liners that people were coming up with from the audience.
Oh no!
He was quite disconcerted by it. It was funny.
So, Bonnie, what intellectual heckling? The worst heckling you can get.
Yeah, when your audience outperforms you at your profession.
That's excellent. Kay, what's the weirdest conference you've been to?
Oh gosh. Yeah, like Bonnie, I'm struggling to think what's been pretty weird. I suppose I never went to a conference, but I did a bit of dry stone walling. So for a couple of years. And
that's brilliant.
So yeah, I guess that would be, in terms of sort of like, oddity, I guess the walling would be the weirdest thing.
Can you mention that conference on dry stone walling?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. Yeah. Sometimes we used to get together in cold weather because you couldn't put frost into the wall. So we used to have a bit of a gathering up, eat Jaffa cakes and tea.
Okay. Sort of so Bonnie, shall we go to Kay's dry stone walling conference when she sets that up? I think it's going to be packed, isn't it? So we're definitely going to do that. Bonnie, I'm just going to sign you up for that, if that's okay. Okay, right. Well, lights on, social media's live. Let's get on with this, because we've had so much interest about this broadcast today, Kay, haven't we?
Oh, I know. Aren't we lucky? Yeah, absolutely, very, very lucky.
So we're now live on LinkedIn. We're live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and we are also going on to our podcast. So just going to set this up and give a little bit of background, especially for those people on the podcast, because Bonnie, they want to hear a bit more of your background. So today, it's a great pleasure to be hosting Beanstalk Global with the AHDB on the Talking Leaders broadcast series with Bonnie Huval, former space shuttle engineer. Bonnie is a dual USA-UK citizen, former space shuttle and Spacelab engineer who became a business consultant specializing in large, complex, daunting situations. And we're going to talk about or talk around what does it take to get someone on the moon? For a while, she led the team that tested space shuttle communication systems to find out exactly how they would behave under very conceivable mission conditions. She also wrote some of the software to handle life science experiment data from Spacelab. After leaving the space program, she became an independent consultant. She's often involved in complex, strategically important projects with daunting technological and business process challenges. Bonnie has a knack for solving problems by looking at them upside down or sideways. So it's great to have you on, Bonnie. Just before we get going, we're just going to get Kay to give a bit of a background to the AHDB and the Talking Leaders series, just so that everyone who knows the AHDB, we reinforce that message further. But those people who perhaps don't know what good work the AHDB does, Kay can tell them all about. Kay, over to you, please. AHDB.
Oh, yeah. So thank you. So, the Talking Leaders program is part of the AgriLeader program. And what we try to do is we try to get people from very much outside agriculture, outside farming, and to try and see, what we can learn from them, and, what great sort of tips and insights that they can bring across. And there's a whole bank of these Talking Leader webinars and podcasts. So please go onto the AHDB website, look back on the ones that we've done already. They're still there, and they're very varied. And yeah, how lucky we to have Bonnie with us today. So
yeah, as we said, Kay, thank you. And Bonnie, as we said when we had our catch up last week, our sector of agriculture and food is great, but sometimes we can be accused of being a little bit myopic or siloed in our thinking, and that's why it's been so inspired by Kay and her colleagues at the AHDB to bring people like yourself in, because the other people that we've had in, we've learned so much from. And Bonnie, you came up with this great line when we had the catch up. Farmers and space people have so much in common. Bonnie, explain that. Why do you think farmers and space people have so much in common?
Well, the big thing we have in common is our time frame. We have a very long horizon. So space people can spend years preparing for a single 1 or 2 week flight, especially if it's a flight with crew on it. It's not going to be terribly long, at least in cosmic terms. But we have to spend years preparing for it. Farmers have to do the same kind of thing. If you plant an orchard, you're not expecting to have a crop to sell like this summer or next summer or the summer after that. It's going to be a few years before your orchard bears fruit, literally. And the same thing is true even if a farmer is planting crops like 2 or 3 crops a year. The farmer still has to think about the soil quality. How do you produce those crops and still keep the soil healthy so that you can keep doing it year after year after year? If you over-farm it, you'll deplete the soil and your farm will go bust. So farmers and space people both have to think in those very long terms. We're doing something today, and we're not going to see any results from it for 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And that's the big thing that we have in common.
Yeah, I just love that analogy. I think, Kay, that's going to be one of our best lines, best analogies for the year, isn't it? I'm just going to say it again: farmers and space people have so much in common. And I got asked this by the team, Bonnie, to ask you with the technology, the increase of technology within farming over the last 100 years. Do you think there's some of the legacy of that farming technology actually went into the space shuttle? That sort of learning, whether it be engineering, whether it be electronics. Do you think there's even more of a link on that basis as well?
I would imagine you'd have to talk to the life science people about that, because we grow things on some of these missions, and we take critters up there to see how they do in microgravity conditions. So I'm pretty sure that they have had to talk with farmers about how do plants grow here? How should we try to grow plants up there? And we're not going to be able to make a closed loop system, something that we can live in up there for the long term, until we learn how we can grow crops up there. Not just a few little seedlings for an experiment. We're going to have to figure out how to scale it up.
But Bonnie, I'm just laughing because one of my contacts has said, can you ask Bonnie? I thought the space shuttle ran with a John Deere engine. Is that a myth?
I don't really know. There were so many components in the space shuttle. There is no way I could know them all. It had components from all over the place, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a John Deere something or other in it, because there was a little bit of everything else.
Yeah, so I was about to say even a pipe. So that space shuttle and everything and all the systems that we talked about earlier, they didn't make themselves. People, the most successful businesses I come across have the best people and the best culture, and they are fantastic in training and developing those people. When you're ensconced within the space shuttle program, was it relatively easy to select, to find people to become part of your team to create the success that you went on to create?
I didn't get to pick my team. The managers did.
Wow.
So somebody up in management picked me and threw me in there. And with all these people, all these engineers who were mostly old enough to be my father or grandfather, they were world-class experts at what they did. They had learned it on the hoof. They had not been to university. most of them. A lot of them were former Army Air Corps. That tells you how far back they go, because Army Air Corps was before there was an Air Force in the United States. And they retired from the military and then went into the space program. So these guys, they were the best that you could find anywhere. They had built themselves up into that. And then I was supposed to be the assistant test conductor at first, helping to boss them around.
Wow.
And I was just a young whippersnapper. And that's awkward. And then after about a year and a half, I became alternate test conductor. So Jack Rivers, who had basically built the lab and had always been the test conductor, he was test conductor sometimes leading the team. And then other times I was test conductor leading the team. That's very awkward when you're in your 20s and you're supposed to lead a team with people like that on it. And you're thinking, I'm not sure they've figured out how stupid I am. And you don't want them to figure it out. You want to somehow catch up and be able to pull your weight. Yeah, that was tricky.
Yeah. So in modern parlance, you call that imposter syndrome. So so you're inferring that you sort of suffered from imposter syndrome, but you just got on with it and pushed that imposter syndrome to one side and countered it and made the success of it.
Yeah, I've had imposter syndrome in more than one place. I've had it when I got to university, because I got out of high school and thought that I was hot stuff. And then I got to university and thought, oops, I'm the only stupid person they accidentally let in. And then I got to the space program and had that same feeling. And then there have been a couple of places after that. Somewhere along the line, I figured out that imposter syndrome is what you feel when you're growing and you're stretching yourself.
Yeah.
If you're not feeling imposter syndrome, then you're not smart enough to recognize how much you still don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And on that basis, Bonnie, if you keep bettering yourself and keep trying to put a lid on that imposter syndrome, you are going to better yourself. Whether that be career-wise, role-wise, it's going to be for the good of you.
Don't get me wrong, it's really uncomfortable having an imposter syndrome, because you're sure that you're the only fool in the whole group, and you don't want them to figure it out. You want to catch up and be respectable. You want to be able to fit into that group and do as well as everybody around you. So it's still very uncomfortable. But once I realized that it was a symptom of growing, a symptom of stretching my boundaries, then I could get through it better. And it was a little bit less scary. So I didn't get to pick the team. I had this feeling that maybe I didn't really belong there. I was having to try and push past that. And fortunately for me, I was doing a lot of volunteer work on the side. I was very involved in the feminist movement in the United States. And when you're working in volunteer organizations, you can't use pay or promotions or any of that usual business stuff to motivate people. They're volunteers. You're not paying them anything. In terms of promotion, how much is a title worth when it doesn't come with anything like a corner office? And so you have to find other ways to get people to feel motivated to do things. Boy, once you figure that out in the volunteer arena, doing it in a business setting is a piece of cake.
Wow. Got it.
And that was the kind of thing that I had to do with my team, because I didn't choose them. I had no control over their pay or promotions. What I did have some control over was how they felt about their job. How did they feel about being in that team? Did they feel like they were important? Did they feel like I valued what they brought to the table? If they were an expert, a world-class expert with no university degree, did they have the feeling that I had my nose up in the air because I had a university degree? Or did they have a feeling that I respected how much they knew that I didn't know? And that I understood I needed their help?
So Bonnie, just go back a bit. You learned that skill set of dealing with people because within the charity sector, you couldn't offer them money, promotion. You had to offer them cultural happiness in some respects. And because you learned that, you were able then to these people that were being presented to you through the Space Shuttle program. It sounds like an arranged marriage in some respects. You just get all of these people presented to you. You've got to figure out very quickly as to how they're wired, what box they go in, and you adapt accordingly to get the best out of them.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. It's a lot more common in business settings than you might think. Remember that after the space program, I went into consultancy. Well, there again, I don't have any control over the team at my client. My client company has their own team. I'm stepping into it and working with them. I've got to figure out how to work with them. And once again, I don't have any control at all over their pay or their promotions. All I can control is how they feel about working on that project. Do they feel like we're doing good things? They're being productive? Do they feel satisfaction from what they're doing? And do they feel like I respect them? Or do they feel like I look down on them? If I look down on them, I've lost it. I'm going to have a failure of a project. If they feel like we're all in it together and they feel valued and they feel like they are making a difference, then I can pull the team together and we can do great things.
But Bonnie, again, that's so interesting. That's it's even more difficult. I hadn't thought about this before. It's even more difficult on a consultancy basis because you're not going to be there every day. Whilst when you're on the Space Shuttle program, you're there. You're able to interact with those people on an ongoing basis. So it's even more of a skill set. Kay, do you see the same with the likes of AHDB, that yourself and Mark and Isaac and your other colleagues, you have to positively influence your farmers sometimes, and because you're not with them, you've got to give sort of high impact, whether it be at a conference or online. Kay, do you see the same things? That it's a specific skill set to be able to bring people with you on a particular journey?
Yeah, I think in the work we do, we have to be relevant very, very quickly, and yeah, it's important for us to sort of make it relevant to farming and to agriculture. But I can see from listening to what Bonnie's been talking about and how that having that different generation, if you like, of a team, and you think of some younger farmers who've picked up the reins from previous generations, and then they're inheriting a sort of a team on the farm potentially. We've seen that, and how that takes a little bit of sort of the differences in sort of personalities, mindset, approach, and how that takes a while to blend together when picking up teams. Yeah, definitely.
Kay, well done, Bonnie. There's always this scenario within farming, and Bonnie, I'm sure you know farmers like this where you're up in Shropshire, and Kay will know examples that there's a generation of a farm could be 3-4 generations, and sometimes when the farms be passed from one generation to the other, the existing generation wants it to remain as it is. It's always worked like this, but the new generation wants to come in and with a new broom and wants to try different things. I did an interview at my potato conference yesterday, and as I mentioned the words to this chap who was a third generation farmer, he'd just taken on the farm from his father. I said, "Oh, was that an easy move for your father to pass on the farm to you?" And I thought, "Oh no, open up this can of worms." And he said, "No, it worked really well because my father is very strategic, and he could see that I could actually do a better job than he would," his own words, but he's mentored me all the way through the process. So with them, it's really interesting what you said within the Space Shuttle program, that you got this old guard that have come from the army, and presumably they're very prescriptive in their way of managing people. And again, your skill set of having to manage them without them realizing they've been managed, and manage the people that you brought on would have been key for you. So on that basis, Bonnie, key principles, values that you followed within the Space Shuttle program, and now what just to give us an idea, what would be your key principles and your values, if that's okay to ask?
If I really am in charge of the team and I'm getting to decide who does what, one of the first things I need to figure out is who does what in the best way. Whose strength is is in writing code, whose strength is in thinking about design, whose strength is in planning things, whatever their skill sets are. And if I can, and you do this in volunteer work a lot too. So all of this started from the volunteer work, and then I had to bring it with me into my paid job and brought it later into consultancy. You need to try and put people together with the things that they're best equipped to do, the things that are their strong suit. It's better for the team and it's better for them. You know, the team gets the best people on each task, but the people also get to succeed more. Now, this is not a concept that comes directly from me. There's a place called the Johnson O'Connor Foundation that does research on knowledge and aptitudes. And I went through their test series when I was in my 20s, actually while I was working at the space program. And they explained that they don't give people career advice in terms of asking you, what do you like? They test you and they find out what are your core skills, what's your best knowledge, what are your best aptitudes, and then they can tell you what jobs especially need the strengths that you happen to have. And from their philosophy, if you're doing things that you're best equipped to do, you're more likely to succeed, and success is what makes people happy. Success is what makes you feel satisfied. So if I can put everybody in my team on the thing that they're best equipped to do, they get more success, they feel more satisfied, then they want to come and work on the project.
Excellent. So what are we inferring here, Bonnie? That one size doesn't fit all. So that if you've got a team, whether that be on a farm or an agricultural supply business, that the managers have got to be what's my word? Erudite. They've got to work out the strengths and weaknesses of each individual, and perhaps have a course for that particular individual to strengthen their strengths, rather than trying to major on the weaknesses. But because that's not going to make them happy. You've got to major on the strengths of people.
Yeah, you want to rely on the strengths of people, and you don't necessarily just want to send them to training. You want to let them have practice. That's how you develop expertise. You get a certain amount of training so that you can get started. Like I needed to have a certain amount of training just to understand what the engineers at the Space Center were talking about. Then after I got in there is when I really learned what makes space shuttle communication systems tick. And I learned it from the people who were working there in the team. Mentoring is important. Practice is important, like practicing the piano. If you needed somebody to do routine maintenance service on your photocopier machine or your laser printer or whatever, you would not want me, because my fine motor control stinks. So I would get through it. You know, I could figure it out. I could do it. But because my fine motor control is not very good, it would take me a lot longer. I would find that frustrating. And so I would end up hating that kind of a job because I wouldn't be very good at it. And no amount of training and practice can fix that. That is something it's the way my body and brain work.
Yeah.
But if you want me to take a look at your problem and try to find a really strange solution that nobody else can think of, I happen to be good at that.
Yeah.
So, you know, you put people on the thing that they're naturally most inclined to do well and let them do it. And the more they do it, the better they get.
Yeah. And you just go back to the point that you made, Bonnie, about imposter syndrome. That's in later life you realize that was just part of the growing. When did you work out that you were no good at fixing photocopiers, but you could look at problems with a different perspective? Was that in your formative years of your career, or was that recently?
No, those are in two pieces. It was Johnson O'Connor, the Johnson O'Connor Foundation, that told me, don't take a technician job. Your fine motor control stinks. And they didn't put it that way. They were much more polite about it. But they're the ones who identified that to me. The part about coming up with oddball solutions, that's something that I didn't realize I was doing until, well into my consulting career. I had gone through the space program. I had left the space program about a year after Challenger blew up and went into IT contracting. So I was doing a lot of programming on a contract basis. And then gradually went into IT consultancy and then business consultancy and so on. But somewhere right around maybe about 5 years, right about the time that I was transitioning from the contract programming to more IT consultancy, I started to realize that I was seeing things that other people weren't seeing.
Okay.
I would look at the way something was put together and realize that it didn't fit. I mean, at one point I went into a telecom company on a contract, and they had some new software that they were rolling out. They had a very tight deadline. This was their last weekend when they could roll it out. And if they didn't, then millions of dollars worth of things that they had pre-sold would be lost. They went to roll it out and it went into an infinite loop. And they couldn't figure out how to solve it. And I had just started on this. They called me and they just said, "We're desperate. Would you please just come look at it?" I hadn't even seen this software before. They had narrowed it down to a few pages of code. So I went in and looked over their shoulders while they walked through it in debug. And within about 30 minutes, I said, "It's in this dozen lines. This dozen lines is where your problem is. It's one of these." Once I pinned it down to that, the people who were familiar with the code looked at it and went, "Oh, it's that one right there."
Okay.
And after that, it's worse than that. After that, I said, "Would you give me a couple of months to work on 2 of these functions in your software and try to improve them?" And to their credit, they did. And in that 2 months, I rewrote just 2 functions in this gigantic software program. And at the end of that, the amount of time that it took them to roll out one of these software changes, I cut it by 50% on one hardware platform and 30% on another. I made it go so fast that they could completely drop some special software they had been using to try to resynchronize everything because it was taking too long. Well, it didn't take too long anymore. And it's all just because there's something about the way my brain works. I can look at patterns and see things that other people don't see and realize that if I just reshape them in some way, things will be better. It's not always software. Sometimes it's business processes, but that's it. And that happened in, I think, the mid-1990s. That particular incident.
And Bonnie, I see it a lot. I'm sure Kay does as well. That what's the expression? Those programmers couldn't see the proverbial wood for the trees because they were just so ensconced with it. And sometimes you need someone like you, Bonnie, coming in, or as we've said previously in some of these broadcasts, Bonnie, the better businesses I come across, the leaders, the owners, the farmers, if they can spend 20-25% of their time just thinking and not be distracted by other stuff going on, they can actually potentially come up with the solutions to problems that they've got because they've got a clear head, and they can actually plan strategically rather than just being caught in the day-to-day. And I've definitely seen some business failures, and they failed because the owners have been meddlers, as you'd say. They've just been in and just been micromanaging. And the better businesses I come across, the owners are they find the right people, and Bonnie, you've already heard it. They just let those people get on with it, and most of the time they do a fantastic job. Sometimes they drop the ball and there's a problem, but it can easily be fixed. But everyone's learned from that. So the better businesses I come across are those where the leaders are strategic and find the better people, let them get on with what they do, and have that time to think. Kay, do you see that with the businesses that you're associated with? That those those people, the better businesses are. You've got people who are just thinking.
Yeah, and it's very easy, isn't it, particularly in farming, because it's so task orientated. It's go, do, and it's such a hard discipline for people just to sort of take a step back and review things, and take the time to review things and the time to think things through. So yeah, I can definitely identify with that.
But Bonnie, at this potato conference, I was boring yourself and Kay about earlier. It was a fantastic potato conference. I sat next to an individual at the dinner, and I was showing off Bonnie about yourself and Kay coming on. And this chap wanted me to ask that he's got a team of 25 people on a big potato farm, and he finds it really difficult to manage and ascertain who's good at what. And he wanted me to ask you, as to what would you do with a bit of a disparate team? How would you try and figure out how to manage them? Oh, Bonnie, what a question! How do you manage people, Bonnie?
Not as well as I would like, but I mean, you asked. You have to pay attention to them, and I know that sounds trite, but it's true. Some bosses, some managers, business owners, bosses, some of them are so busy trying to manage everything, trying to control everything, be in the center of everything, make sure that they are in charge, that they forget to let their people do what their people are good at. So being a really good boss involves a lot of letting go, and that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
It's the thing that you're responsible for. And so you don't want to let go of it. You want to be in charge of it, take care of it, make sure everything is all right. The thing is, you as a boss have a limited skill set and a limited view. So the more that you clamp down and gather it all to yourself, the more you tie your entire project, your entire business, your entire farm, your entire spacecraft to that one set of skills and that one view. The best bosses I've ever worked with anywhere in any capacity were really good at taking small steps back, not a giant step back, but a little step back. They'll notice that this person over here seems to have the right kind of mindset to be a really good software release manager. And so they assign that person to come up with the new release management protocol and then to be in charge of it. Okay, now they have let go of that bit. They just check in a little bit once in a while. Are you doing okay? How's it going? But they only step in when they really have to. And then they do the same thing with some other piece of work that needs to be done in their organization, one piece at a time, until after a little while, everybody in the team is doing what they're best at, coordinating with the others in the team at the places where there are interfaces. The boss is only troubleshooting, really.
Yeah.
Really only having to step in when something goes wrong.
Yep.
And it's there is kind of an art to it. It does take a lot of patience and a lot of paying attention to people. And I'm trying to think how to make that simple.
It's to me the phrase of "let go to grow" or abdicate. Don't delegate. Don't abdicate. Again, sorry, Kay, I keep on referring back to yourself because you will see this as well, Kay, that the better businesses. I remember going to a couple of years ago, just pre the pandemic, going to a particular agricultural university, and we caught up with the Prin, and we went into lunch. He said, "Oh, just excuse me, everyone. I was with a bunch of about 6 people. I've just got to check on someone." And he went behind the counter of the catering, and it turned out that one of the cooks, the son had an appendix. Operation wasn't very well.
Wow.
But he just knew, and and it was very genuine. It was just a light touch to make sure. And when we were on the way out, I overheard some of the kitchen staff saying, "Our principal's brilliant, isn't he?" And he didn't do it on he did it on a completely genuine basis. And he could have driven the child to hospital or whatever and just got too involved. But he was just aware, and he was just caring. So Bonnie, it's even further. It's just having that light touch and knowing generally what's going on.
I think and
to ask the questions and just to listen to people. And if people feel listened to, that's such a motivating thing just in itself, just to ask a question and be listened to.
And I know how to get across how part of how you should ignore the classic business management advice to do it right.
Tell us. Yeah, go on.
Have you read any of Temple Grandin's books?
I haven't, but I know of them. Okay.
No, I haven't. Sorry.
Temple Grandin is autistic, and her specialty is things like abattoirs. She wants the animals not to suffer before they die. She wants them to be as comfortable as they can be right up until the last instant. It's good for the animals, it's good for the meat, it's good for the whole thing. And because she's autistic, she can understand how the animals think and feel better than most of us can. She got called into a big facility. They were having terrible problems. And when she went in to help them solve their productivity problems, they said, "We measure all these things and we don't understand why things aren't working well." They had this huge list, something like a couple hundred things that they were measuring every day about how they were doing their work. She looked at that and she said, "Well, that's your problem. You're measuring too much." And classic management books will tell you, you can't manage what you don't measure. Well, actually, if you measure too much, you will screw up your management. So she whittled it down to about a dozen things that will, they will show the effects of something going wrong. Just maybe a dozen things to keep an eye on every day. If those stay within a certain range, then you're doing well and you don't need to drill down to anything else. If one of them goes out of range, then something is wrong. And then you can take a portion of that longer list, start looking at those figures and pin it down. A little bit like me narrowing it down to, it's in this dozen lines of code. Well, and then you can go through the dozen lines of code and find the one that's bad. So she was telling them, you're measuring too much every day. You need to only measure these dozen things that will be the canary in the coal mine if something goes wrong.
Got it. Yeah.
And so sometimes the business books are just wrong. And they are just wrong about that. Don't measure everything. Only measure what you need to measure to see that things are humming along reasonably well. Drill down if something goes wrong. If you do it that way, then you have the attention to spare to pay attention to your people and see what they're good at and what they're not good at and put them on the right assignments.
So Bonnie, absolutely. So Bonnie, are you basically inferring to Kay and I that we shouldn't let businesses be run by accountants because they measure too much?
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with accountants, by the way. Any accountants
they're necessary, they're wonderful, but they are good at accounting and they are not necessarily great at running a business.
But then again, Bonnie Kay, it's all about having a team, isn't it? Having the finance individual, having the commercial individual, having the technical individual. But Bonnie, nothing ever goes right in business. What's the expression? The only thing you can ever predict is change. You already intimated about it. If it's okay to ask, when you lost the challenger, that must have been a devastating scenario for you. And not trying to draw comparisons, but on another broadcast, we had a lovely lady on who runs a very significant vegetable business up in Scotland. And about 10 years ago, they had a devastating fire Luckily, no one was hurt, but it was a month before Christmas, and they were the biggest carrot producer in Scotland, and they lost the whole building. The fire was so hot it cracked all the concrete. And what we learned from the broadcast was that they had a disaster recovery plan, and they just followed that process, and they had all the best experts to come in, and they didn't drop one carrot to their supermarkets on run up to Christmas. With the likes of the Challenger scenario, what was that like, and how did you or positively recover from that, please?
Losing Challenger, if you can imagine having a bunch of your family in a van going somewhere, and they're in a crash and they all die, that's how it felt. It
Wow.
felt like losing family. And it wasn't just the space program that felt that way. The whole city of Houston felt that way. The whole city of Houston went around driving with their headlights on for days afterwards as a sign of respect and grief.
Wow.
All of us in the program, we dropped everything that we were doing, and we spent days and days huddled around monitors watching slow motion replays from all the camera angles. There are lots and lots of cameras watching every launch. All of us trying to see what went wrong, what went wrong, what went wrong. And it didn't take terribly long to see that little spout of fire coming out from the joint on the solid rocket toward the main fuel tank. But then why did that happen? Nearly everything had to come to a halt because we didn't know exactly what went wrong, and we couldn't carry on with the program. We couldn't do another flight until we knew what went wrong and how to fix it. The hearings began. All of us who could watched that on the monitors. And everybody kept saying, something is really wrong. Look at Sally Ride's face. They're finding out something really bad. And then, of course, Professor Feynman did his infamous little demonstration with an O-ring and a glass of ice water.
Yeah.
And there it was. Now, the scuttlebutt around Washington, D.C., right after it happened, was that Ronald Reagan intended to mention Krista McAuliffe, the teacher who was on that flight, during his State of the Union address that night. She had to be in orbit when he gave that address. And the scuttlebutt was that the White House told NASA, you have to launch. That was the last launch window before the State of the Union address. Nobody knows for sure whether that really happened or whether it's just gossip that somebody made up, but the White House immediately put a 20-year secrecy seal on all the White House call logs for that day.
Crikey.
And as far as I know, that secrecy seal keeps getting renewed. So I don't know if that's what happened. That's what the gossip was. And certainly impounding the call logs doesn't help, does it?
No.
We shouldn't ever launch when the launch criteria are not met. It was pretty clear fairly early in the investigation that the launch criteria were not met. The outside temperature was too cold.
Yep.
You know, by quite a bit colder than it was supposed to be. And we've never, all of us who are ordinary worker bees, we've never fully understood why that launch happened. It shouldn't have. NASA is very keen on following its rules. All of its rules are there for a reason. They're not just made up. They're not for fun. They all have a reason. And it was inconceivable to all of us that anybody would go against the launch criteria. So why somebody did that, I don't know for sure. We all felt very betrayed.
Wow.
And it's hard to come back from that.
But Bonnie, you as a leader of your people, how did you come back? How did you get the morale back up with your team to Control Alt Delete go again?
I wasn't on the space shuttle team anymore when that happened. I was on the Spacelab team.
Yep. Okay.
and doing software and not the team lead anymore.
Okay.
So I don't know what they did in the electronic systems test lab to try and keep morale up and pull the team back together. I know that we were pretty shaken over in the Spacelab building. And we were very aware that Spacelab was supposed to be on that flight. We would have lost that too. And a Spacelab flight was always as fully crewed as it could be. It would have been an even bigger loss than it was.
Yep.
Things got, something or other wasn't ready. And so Spacelab got bumped to a later flight. So we were all very, very conscious of all these other moving parts that had just happened to be in the right place to not lose any more than we lost. We just, I guess we were very disciplined when I think about it. And even though we had all these very disturbing feelings roiling around inside, we just put our heads down and kept on working.
Yeah.
A space flight is, you don't want to be the person who caused a space flight to fail. You don't want to be the person who caused a space flight to be delayed if it didn't have to be.
Yep.
And so if there was a flight that we were working on, something in the future, in my case, Spacelab, then we just carried on.
Yep.
Because sooner or later, somebody else in the program was going to figure out why Challenger blew up.
Yep.
And whatever it was that made Challenger blew up, we were not going to do that again.
Yep.
And
yeah,
indeed, we didn't. When we lost Columbia, we lost it differently.
Yeah. Yep. And life moves on, doesn't it? And you've got to, I suppose, in that circumstance, you've got to have that positive distraction. There's still work to be done. But and that's no offense to what's happened previously, but you've got to keep going forward, Bonnie.
The same thing happens when you lose somebody in your family. When you think about it, it hurts like hell, and it's hard to make yourself go on. And you maybe slow down a bit, you stumble a bit for a while, but you still have to make breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You still have to get the kids off to school if you have kids. You still have to take the dogs for a walk if you have dogs. Whatever it is that ticks around in your life, you have to carry on with it. And there are other people who are depending on you for those things. So really, that was happening on a very large scale all the way through the space program. We all had that sense of grief as if somebody in the family died. And we all still had to go walk the dogs, and we still had to make dinner. Yep.
Time eases all pain. But Bonnie, with yourself, with the fascinating background with that you've had with NASA, you could have stayed with NASA all the way through, but you decided to become independent, and you seem to be. You seem to have been mad that you became independent during the last recession. What were you thinking around that? And what was it, an easy transition?
It was an interesting transition, I guess is the way to put it, because there's even more to it than you know. I had lived in Texas all my life. And when I left the space program, I went from a regular job to being on contract. I moved from Texas to the state of Maryland, northeastern Maryland, and I started working up in Delaware. So I changed everything, and I went from living in a house to living in a very small apartment. Everything changed, and the software that I needed to wrap my brain around at that first contract was very complex, had about a 1-year learning curve.
Good grief.
And if you were lucky, if you could wrap your brain around it at all, and some people couldn't. That first year was so confusing. And I had imposter syndrome again. I know, it's just a regular theme for me. And the first few months, it's like, I don't understand this stuff at all. What am I doing here?
Oh, Bonnie.
But eventually I started to make heads or tails of it and became expert enough in it to teach courses about the internals of it. So it just takes some time. But I did just kind of turn everything completely upside down and shake it. And I kind of had to. The program stalled while the Challenger investigation was going on. There wasn't enough work to keep all of us. NASA was trying to keep as many as they could, but I was going to have to sit there and do nothing but read technical manuals until whenever this investigation completed, and I'm not very good at that. So I stuck around for a year, and I helped write the contract proposal for the company that I was working for at the time. Most of what NASA does isn't done by NASA employees. It's done by people who work for companies.
Got it.
And that's on purpose, so that the new technologies and the new know-how that gets developed by NASA spins out into the rest of society easier. If it was all done by government employees, it would just stay in the government. And so I helped put together that next contract proposal, and then I left and went contract and went into IT instead of engineering. Like I said, I turned absolutely everything upside down. I couldn't hang around and do nothing but read technical manuals for a couple of years.
Got it. So Bonnie, with your background, your fascinating background, and just looking to segue this over to agriculture, what do you think we need to do in agriculture, whether it's people, whether it's the crops, whether it's the land, from you and your worldly wise experience in NASA and consultancy, what would your direct advice be as to how we can make agriculture, farming even more successful to feed the nation, if not feed the world? What would your advice be, please?
It certainly feels like we're going to have to turn that kind of upside down and shake it. Climate change is, we're lucky in that the UK is one of the places on the globe that should stay the most habitable for the longest as the climate shifts. So we're lucky in that sense, but exactly what will grow well here is going to change. Our rainfall patterns are going to change. They are changing. They've changed just since I moved to the UK. And so doing things the way we've always done them probably is going to stop working well. And it's going to be hard to let go of that and change it, but I think we'll have to. It looks like we have to make some pretty big changes in how we use labor, because we cut ourselves off from a lot of our labor source. And we also have a lot of people sick. We have a whole upheaval happening in our workforce in general. So agriculture is competing for workers with other businesses that are also short of workers. And it's going to be tough for farmers to be able to get enough labor to do things the way we're accustomed to doing them. We have to find some new ways of doing things. And if I knew the solutions, I'd probably be wealthy. The main thing I can say is I can see this coming. And if you get ahead of it, if you step back from your farm, your orchard, your vineyard, whatever it is that you've got, maybe your herd of sheep. We have a lot of sheep in Shropshire. If you can step back from that a little bit and try to let go of the way that you've always done things, try to think about what is really going to make sense and what is really going to make me nimble enough to handle all these changes that are about to come at me. That's where we're going to have to go. I'm going to wind up seeing it unfolding all around me. There's a farm right across the street from my home office. I look out the window at it all the time. And it's changing. It's about to put in an orchard in the low part of a field instead of trying to keep horses there, for example.
It's it's we're picking this up from so many people our end that where we're in Bury St Edmunds. There's a view that in East Anglia it's been a predominant wheat and barley growing area, but as the climate changes, especially potatoes, going back to my potato conference, there's a big issue with water availability for irrigation in North Norfolk, and a number of the farmers are demanding that the UK government put in infrastructure, put in new reservoirs, put in reservoirs up north so water can be plumbed down. But actually, should we not be growing different croppings to Bonnie, to use your phrase, to be nimble, not doing things as they've always been done, seeing where the climatical conditions are taking us, and look to grow accordingly. Kay, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously AHDB is a very data-driven organisation, and they do some amazing work on different varieties and what works in different soils. So yeah, definitely go and tap into all that knowledge library that's there. But in that sort of having that agile mindset, that nimble mindset, and thinking about things differently is definitely something to be sort of taken on board. And to be open-minded, I suppose. It's very hard. I think, UK farmers are so resilient. They're sort of the most patient, resilient, resourceful people that, they make good of what they've got. And then they are very, they can solve problems. I think, a lot of what Bonnie's been talking about, I think there's a lot of farmers that have all those aptitudes and abilities already. And it's almost just spreading that wider, isn't it?
Yeah, and Bonnie, there's a great expression that's used by South African farmers. I'm not sure if it's politically correct or not, but they've said over the last 2-3 years, never waste a crisis. So with everything that we've been going through within UK agriculture, you could see that. Hopefully there won't be too many failures, but the better businesses will be dialing in, will be aligned to the likes of AHDB, the data that they've got, and strategically changing their businesses and learning, Bonnie, from the likes of yourself as to how to better manage the most important resource you've got, not only soil but people. Bonnie, just as we're coming up to the witching hour, the better businesses that you've come across, whether it be business units within NASA or the businesses that you've been associated with on a consultancy basis, you'll have that fantastic radar and be able to I'm sure you'll be able to walk into a business and very quickly establish this is a good business. They've got a great team, they've got great management. What's the magic dust in those businesses, please, Bonnie?
The managers don't micromanage. The team is almost self-managing, and the managers just act as strategic guidance and as problem solvers when things go wrong. That's the big thing that all the really good ones have had in common. Max, you said something a couple minutes ago that I don't want to lose. As we think about how to deal with all these problems coming at us, it's not wise for us to choose a solution that locks us into something for the long term. So if the solution to the crops that we're growing is that we need to do a big infrastructure project to build a reservoir, that's going to lock us into a particular path for like decades, maybe even generations. And at the pace of climate change, we probably can't afford that because things will shift. And so we might build a big reservoir in a place that's going to lose the amount of rainfall necessary to keep it full. And well, if you have a big reservoir, it's also a very large evaporation space. So you can look at some of the big lakes over in the States, at Lake Mead and Lake Powell. Look at what level they're at now that the U.S. has a long-term drought happening. So if our rainfall patterns shift away from where we build a big new reservoir, we'll just have a big hole in the ground that's not doing us any good and that we spent a bunch of our resources on. It's better if we choose solutions that are smaller and that are easier to change direction with. And so as you said, maybe we need to grow a different crop. That's a better short-term solution. And the reservoir would take years to build anyway. Do you really want to wait that long to be able to grow your potatoes?
Yeah, well done, Bonnie. That's so inspired. Cotton in Australia. I did my placement year from my college on cotton, and we used to order the cotton from a dam 150 kilometers away in Brisbane. It would take 3 days to get to us. We would then pump it out and pump it into 200, 300 hectare man-made reservoirs, and the evaporation rate through the whole process was in excess of 35%. And so environmentally, it was this, and we were compacting the soil with the hideous largest kit, and the local farmers were using drip irrigation and using light machinery and getting far better cropping, which is no surprise. But Bonnie, just to wrap up, from an outsider's view looking in, what would you like to see for agriculture with all the climate change that we've got going on, with the issues that we've got around labour, but people still need to eat, and there's a great positivity, I believe, I'm sure Kay would endorse this, on eating British food. From an outsider looking in, with your lovely home view from Shropshire, what would you like to see for UK agriculture over the next 3, 4, 5 years to achieve?
I'd like to see us start paying more attention to some different methods of doing things. We use a lot of big tractors, a lot of large scale. We're starting to borrow a lot of the large scale farming techniques from places that have more land, like the US.
Yep.
And I'm not sure that fits us as well as it should. So it may be that we should take another look and think about maybe doing smaller fields of different crops, spreading the risk a bit.
Yeah.
For example, so instead of having one big field of potatoes, you might split it into 3 fields and grow carrots on one and potatoes on one and something else.
Yeah.
Sweet corn or whatever on the third one. And then if the climate change throws you a curve and messes up one of the crops, you haven't lost your entire season. Maybe the other 2 pieces of the field produce okay. I think we need to be thinking in those kinds of terms instead of going for economies of scale so much. I think we may find that we need to go for slightly smaller bites of things and spread our risk and spread our need for labor, because if we've got those 3 different fields, they should need labor at slightly different times.
Bonnie, that's my word of the day. You're inspired. I think you should be a farm management business consultant, because I remember 20 years ago at Agricultural College, University, being taught that the best farms tend to have 5 different enterprises, because in any given year, 3 will do okay. One will be a complete bummer, excuse my French, and one might be the startling success, but it always changes. It's a bit like potatoes, that so you tend to have a really good year one year and 4. But as you say, if you're spreading your risk across the whole area, and we haven't talked much about soil, but it could be very beneficial to your soil, especially not having large tractors. Just to top and tail the tractor element, on with my recruitment hat on, all the farm managers that we're interviewing and recruiting, a number of them are looking to move away from big tractors because they know the damage it does to the soil pan, and they want to put smaller tractors on, which can actually be more efficient, and especially with the price of diesel, are more affordable to run. Everyone, we're just running out of time. Kay, would you like to wrap up for us? Because I think we've learned so much from Bonnie, whether it be from how you run, how you build a space shuttle, to that direct farm advice. Kay, do you want to wrap up for us, please?
Yeah. So the few notes I've been making as I've going along was that lovely one about the imposter syndrome, but actually that is a sign of growth, and that's a good thing. And you just get more comfortable with it as you go along. The whole thing about playing to people's strengths in teams, find out what people are good at and then let them be good at it, and step back as a sort of in the leadership management role. That whole point about stepping back and having better perspective and being able to sort of troubleshoot from a bit further back. And we know Bonnie's fantastic at the problem solving, so I can see how she's got good at that. And then that sort of, just her life in general has been a bit of a roller coaster, really, when you look at the tragedy at NASA, but how that sort of inspired her to go into sort of the more independent side, and that just that the roller coaster is there to be ridden. And what a joy to have been able to listen to Bonnie for an hour.
Bonnie, thank you. Kay, well done. That you wrapped it up so much better than I ever would. That was great. So Bonnie, would you like to say anything to round off to our UK and international agricultural audience? Go on, Bonnie. The floor is yours.
Okay. Actually, Kay led into it really well. Life should be a grand adventure composed of many smaller ones. You can do that with your farm.
That's good, isn't it? And everyone, I'm just going to go back to our point that we were making about financial people. I've had a WhatsApp from a CFO, Chief Financial Officer of a £200 million agriculture and fresh produce business. And this CFO says, Max, you're all right. Never let a finance individual run your business for you. But Bonnie, you've been fantastic, Kay. Thank you very much. Oh, just must mention with the AHDB, we're all at Llama. We're doing our circle of influence, where we've got Bonnie. It's great. We have all these YouTubers who are so good at communicating. They've got such a following, and we stick a camera in front of them and have a debate about labour and where the sector's going. And we're learning so much from that younger generation. So we're going to be at Llama in the middle of January, up at the NEC in Brum. Bonnie, thank you very much. Give our regards to Shropshire. Kay, thank you very much. And everyone, have a fantastic Christmas and a very safe New Year. Thank you, Bonnie. Thank you, Kay.
Bye-bye.